Today on the Winning with Shopify podcast, a few people we've had on the podcast have said actually when Trump had his first term in office, they started importing from China materials instead of products.
It's going to impact how you think about your business, how you price your own products.
That tariff is absolutely huge.
This is what Donald Trump has said, another 60%, but at the end of the day, you need to pay attention closely to what actually will be done.
People have got to adjust.
You really took me back to my A-level economics there.
Our partners at Seguno have released a brand new app for Shopify, and it's called Shopify Connect for Canva. You can essentially look at all of your product images from Shopify directly in Canva and export them straight back. This can save you a lot of time. If you want to find out a bit more about this or go and find the app yourself, you can go to seguno.com/Canva. Enjoy. So welcome to today's episode, everybody. Very different type of episode that I'm very, very excited about. We're going to talk about a few things we don't normally talk about with my excellent guest, Laurence. So Laurence, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, Nick. Yeah, I'm doing really well, thanks. Great to be here.
Great stuff. Well, great to have you on the show. And I said it's going to be quite a different show. And anyone that's seen the little clips before we get into this bit will be like, oh my gosh, we've never spoken about economies, presidents, prime ministers, and what's going on and other stuff. Tell us a bit about your background. Like, why have I invited you on the show today?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, hopefully it will be really interesting to dive into a few of these things today. I'm Laurence. I work for an economic data provider, namely Bloomberg. My job is to get economic data out to our clients quickly and accurately for them to go and make decisions about where they want to invest their money, how they see the world, and using all that information to make strategic decisions, basically.
Amazing. And I mean, most of our listeners will be gung-ho on data, I hope. If you're not, guys, then you're doing it wrong. But we obviously look at a lot of data within kind of analytics, how Shopify is performing, advertising campaigns, that sort of stuff. But just to be clear, guys, and I sort of said to Laurence before we hit record, we may or may not touch on this, but just to be really clear, like what Laurence isn't going to do today is tell you what you should be doing. He's going to explain like, this is what the economies are doing, this is what the data says. However, I'm not regulated, so I am able to then say, so my advice is go and do this. And I can say that because I'm in a very different position to Laurence. But I'm mostly going to try and focus on the outputs of what Laurence tells us, what it means for us as an e-commerce business, what opportunities there might be. It's your job, guys, to take that away and go, that doesn't apply to me. It does apply to me. I'm going to try this, try this, try this. So let's dive in then, Laurence. So let's start off with a very big question. And I put in the notes a snapshot, right? What do the UK and US look like for online retailers right now?
Yeah, fantastic question. I think the answer to this question is definitely twofold. UK and US are definitely moving in different directions here. So maybe let's start with the UK. I think we've just come through Christmas. You'd expect that to be a period of time where sales do well. I think the data kind of show that maybe it's a little bit more muted than it has been in the past. And I think a lot of that is going to be around due to confidence. So like both consumer confidence, people are buying your goods and services, and also business confidence as well. And I think we'll probably dig into this a little bit more, but around like the national insurance side of things and what that means for businesses. I think, looking forward, there are potentially, some concerns there. On the other hand, US, I think, in the last year, consumers have kind of stayed quite strong despite like high inflation and higher interest rates. They've been quite resilient to both inflation and those interest rates. And retail sales, like in December for the Christmas period, seem to have done pretty well. Definitely helped by things like Black Friday, discounts online. And I think there is a little bit of optimism, and though also a bit of uncertainty with Donald Trump coming into power next year. Well, end of this month, actually.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's always uncertainty when there's big changes at the top, isn't there? And I think you've summed it up quite well. That I think I and a lot of people were quite surprised, actually, even just at the announcement of Trump. There was certainly, I mean, if social media in the UK was anything to go by, you'd think there's an economic crash and a social crash around the corner. But actually, things didn't do that at all when Trump was announced, didn't they? And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but from my kind of, just consumerism approach to the media of going, what's the media telling me? it looked like there was quite a nice jump. And I've got a couple of stats to share as well, just purely around Shopify in a sec about actually what happened. But it seemed like there was a nice jump in the US, whereas almost kind of political announcements in the UK have had the opposite effect here, haven't they? As you say, it's two very different stories.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just touching on the US is there are two sides to Donald Trump coming in, and the side that is kind of positive that I think a lot of businesses will be happy about, and you see show up in business sentiment, is that deregulation and tax cuts probably will boost economic growth. Definitely at the kind of towards the start of his second regime. I think where you've got to be cautious, and maybe we'll come on to this, is around the tariffs and some of the uncertainty that plays up there. And obviously, if you have international supply chains in your business, that's something you need to really kind of consider and think about.
So obviously, there's a lot going on in the UK and US, but how are the politics and economies actually influencing retailers then? Like, are you seeing anything that retailers are doing differently? Any adjustments they're making? You mentioned obviously supply chains is something that people really need to look at, especially in the US at the moment. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Is there any data to support it? Anything that you guys are aware of?
Yeah, I guess if we want to touch on supply chains and tariffs, like if we think about the economics behind that policy with Donald Trump. So obviously he hasn't come into power yet, and we don't quite know the extent of what he will actually do. But he talks a big game when it comes to tariffs. So we're looking at like potentially 60% tariffs on China, and somewhere between like 10 and 20% tariffs on the rest of the world. And just to break it down, kind of go back to first principles on this for economics, is like tariffs really are designed to do one or two things, which is either protect an industry, domestic industry in the US in this case, or to raise revenue for the government, for the US government. And the way they work is that it's the importers, the US businesses and consumers that are importing goods from abroad, that have to pay those tariffs on top of the prices of the goods that you would normally pay. So let's say you had a 10,000 US dollar car imported from China, you'd have to pay another 6,000 US dollars on top of that in terms of import tariffs if it was set at 60%. So obviously those will impact consumers and businesses negatively in terms of higher prices. And if you kind of break that down and think about your supply chain, I'm sure a lot of businesses have quite complex supply chains, and from around the world, you know it's going to impact how you think about your business, how you price your own products. Do you absorb that cost? Do you pass that on? Will you see less demand for your goods if your goods go up by 10%? Or is that something that your consumers can actually absorb and will continue to buy?
Absolutely. I think it's a really important point. And I guess just for reference, like how does the US tariff specifically on China, given the growth of Alibaba, and I mean I've run businesses where we ordered everything from China, lots of companies in the US and UK do it, and other economies, like how does that compare to other countries? Like is everyone kind of following suit with the US, or is it quite an anomaly in that sense?
I don't have the data to hand, but I think definitely, during the last Donald Trump presidency, and we're expecting in this one those tariffs to increase. Under Biden, a lot of those tariffs were kept; they didn't change, or they didn't get reduced. And I think that a large part of that is due to like the strategic nature of them, the industries that they're targeting, and the domestic US industries that those administrations are trying to protect. So a lot of it also comes down to like security and like thinking about computing, for example. So I don't have it compared to the rest of the world. They are definitely high against China, and a lot of that is for strategic regions. I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess again, I said I'll comment as much as I can for you guys listening on like what it means for you. And I think you put it quite well, Lawrence, that you need to look at supply chains and who you're reliant on here. A few people we've had on the podcast have said actually when Trump had his first term in office, they started importing from China materials instead of products and built their own chain of building here. I say here as in the US. And I thought that was quite a good kind of response actually to it, and probably what the US government were really aiming for with it, which was actually now we're doing more production on our own shores. But I know for a fact you'll tell me it's way more complicated than that, Laurence, because obviously labor costs are higher compared to less transportation if you're just moving clay to the US and making your own products there. We spoke to, they're called China Clay Imports, and they actually have no reference at all to China. They're a business we had on the podcast a few months ago. If anyone missed them, they've actually been on twice now. But they get everything from Mexico. When they use the word China, it's only talking about the product. It's actually like China plates and stuff like that, rather than the country. But they used to import, they told us, from China, but they stopped doing that because Mexico was a lot cheaper and they get stuff straight across the border. It's obviously better environmental impact. They actually moved their office from kind of, I think they're in the Midwest down to Texas. They're even closer to the border, so less distance to move that stuff across the border. And we've seen quite a few businesses do that. I think certainly we spoke about inventory management through peak quite a lot before we got into peak in 2024. That's obviously a big thing that you guys need to look at with these forthcoming changes. Is, I guess, Trump in a way is kind of saying with this tariff and other things is like, we're just going to do stuff within the US now. Like, let's do as much as we can here. And there's a lot of natural resources in the US. You know, whatever you make your products from, there's some really good ways of doing that. Portland Leather Goods are another business we've had on the show, I think at least 2, possibly even 3 times. And they're looking at the beef industry and going, because you're getting a lot of beef from cows, lots of leather gets thrown away. We're making products out of that byproduct of leather. They used to import it from, I don't know if it's from China, but I think they used to import initially. And then they actually started just getting leather from within the US because there's a big move to let's use US beef in our restaurants, in our supermarkets, etc. And using that byproduct. And they've gone from having their products made to now making them themselves as well. So certainly, I think a big move towards that sort of thing. I remember when I was importing stuff from China, I think it was about 10 or 15% on sunglasses I was importing in the UK, just to show where where the US is at the moment with that tariff is absolutely huge. Is there anything else you're seeing, Laurence, like even in the UK or any other economies, or even as a global kind of movement? We've not mentioned the EU yet, which is obviously a big move. There was a big announcement I'll bring up in a bit, purely in the marketing world from the EU that brought to my attention a few weeks ago. But is there anything else going on that you think kind of politically that's affecting economics that actually retailers in particular are either a threat at, or actually there's an opportunity that, you know, might be coming their way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would love to just get onto the UK in a second as well. There's a lot to be said there. But in terms of opportunities as well for the US with these tariffs, you also have to consider like what goods are being covered by these tariffs, what opportunities are there for you as well. And I think what some industries also might see is ahead of Donald Trump's introducing these tariffs, actually big increase in sales in things like big ticket items, cars, electronics, or even materials, for example, like you were saying, because consumers actually want to get them now before price increases may come about. So there definitely are opportunities, and I think you need to be strategic and think about exactly where this might happen. And I think it's also, just to tie it up, I also think just to say that this is what Donald Trump has said, another 60%, but at the end of the day, you need to pay attention closely to what actually will be done. So at the moment, there's a lot of uncertainty, and to kind of tie up where we are on the US economy, like it's going pretty strongly at the moment. So it looks pretty positive for them.
Yeah. Let's talk UK as well then. You mentioned it, like, I think because we both live on these shores, probably a little bit more aware. We're certainly talking about it a few days ago, weren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so this is one that I'm sure many people have talked over a pint at the pub, a great
Mm.
British
Or a curry in
pastime.
our case, yeah.
Yeah, so like, I think the UK and the US are facing different problems, and in the UK, really since the end of the financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, has struggled for economic growth to really kick on, pick up. We've had a lot of issues around productivity, and so and that's also been reflected in our fiscal situation. So that means like government spending. So we just had a new Labour government come in, replacing 10 plus years of Conservative rule. And one of the big tax rises that occurred during that budget was the increase in employer contributions for national income. And I think really this is, at least in the short term, having a significant impact on business confidence and then also consumer confidence.
Yeah, and I just to add some figures, I'm going to round these up just because I don't have the actual numbers to hand, but I posted about this and I've mentioned it twice in the podcast already. The British Retail Consortium, and there'll be a similar set of organisations probably in the US, but the British Retail Consortium, they wrote an open letter from, I think it was like the top 100 retailers in terms of turnover, about 60 of them signed it. To give you an idea of the scope of this thing, there's about 100 and again, I'm going to round these numbers, is between sort of 120 to 130 billion circulating every year of money in the retail space. They're talking that there was something around plastic tax, which they're introducing very quickly, and retailers do not have a chance to adjust to that. I think the number was around 7 billion. You can Google it to see the report as well, but it was very public. And then national insurance is costing somewhere between, I think it's between sort of 7 and 12 billion on top of that. When you look at the total 120 to 130 billion, I think it was 128 was the exact number. When you look at the total of that, that's suddenly heading to government pocket, you're like, what exactly, as you say, Laurence, about productivity? What's going to happen to all these jobs? People are going to be let go. You know, we've seen lots of kind of physical store companies already that we work with go, we're going to have to tighten our belts quite a lot here. And if you look at the increase in sales just to cover the plastic tax until you can get plastic out of your organization, it's a lot in one go, isn't it? And again, we're not. I don't want us to start judging or moaning about it. It is what it is. People have got to adjust. There's a lot of adjustments to make to that, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's pretty unlikely that you'll see businesses just suck it up and absorb these increasing costs. It's pretty unrealistic. I think really you're going to see one of three things, or if not a combination of them all. And you kind of touched on them there a little bit, Nick. And first would be because of the increase in the national insurance. The scaling back of new orders or scaling back of capital investment. Second could be the pausing or delay of hiring plans. I don't think it's so serious that we'll see, people being cut. But if someone leaves your business, you may take longer to rehire, or you may choose not to rehire because of the costs involved. And then finally, the third point, also, just passing that cost straight onto the consumers. So each of these three have kind of negative impacts, second round impacts on the economy with lower productivity or economic growth. The worsening of consumer confidence, and potentially even a tick up again in inflation in the retail sector. So, unfortunately, not a great situation to be in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I think you're right. I don't think we're going to see 20% of all staff get let go, certainly not in the retail space. Some industries we are starting to see that. We luckily we've got quite a diverse portfolio of clients here at Spec, my main agency. So we've seen the construction industry are the ones that seem to be panicking the most. They're all in a massive flux of like, what are we going to do? In terms of US brands that we're working with, just to bring the US back into play, a lot of them are they're kind of enjoying, as you said earlier, Laurence, like they're enjoying this commercial sort of uplift. I said about some stats from Shopify. I did a whole episode on this if people want to go back and check it in December. I relayed all of Shopify's statistics following Black Friday, and it was absolutely mad how much more money was being made. The UK, though, we normally year on year, we're kind of double-digit percentage up on previous year for Black Friday itself, Cyber Weekend, and peak. Looking at kind of one day, one weekend to the whole kind of 2 months of peak into Christmas. Shopify itself announced it was single digit figures in the UK this year. It's bad. That was really, really bad, and especially after such a hard year. No, actually, Black Friday itself actually landed quite late in November. So a lot of businesses were quite worried about that. Didn't have the uptick. That hit the US as well, purely just because where it landed in the calendar. The US, though, a lot of our clients, they do recognize they are sort of riding this wave at the moment, and they are sure there's another side to the wave where it's going to come down. A lot of them predicting that until Trump's come in and actually made changes or made more official announcements of, I'm going to push this through. And I don't fully understand the political system in the US, but there's still kind of Congress and stuff to approve everything, isn't there? Do you ever find that in your warehouse you have dead stock? You can't sell it, no one wants to buy it, and you can't get a refund on it. Or alternatively, you're missing inventory in your warehouse that you need. You've got sales coming in and you're low on stock and you haven't ordered more stock in time. All these things hit profit. And I've been there. I've run my own Shopify store and had exactly that problem. But we've partnered it up with Inventory Planner, who have the most incredible app to help you manage that and forecast exactly what products, what SKUs, even down to what color of product you need to order in advance to make sure stock levels remain consistent throughout. They're also running a 7-day boot camp. And if you want to go and sign up to that, it's 7 emails over 7 days. And it takes the same amount of time as your morning coffee. And in 7 days, like me, you can become an inventory management pro. Both links are in the description. Enjoy. It's going to be a bit of a journey. And I think a lot of our clients in the US are saying, like, actually, we're riding this wave now. So actually, a lot of them are overspending on advertising and things right now, here in kind of January, the time I'm recording this. It's going to be interesting to see where that changes. But I think that there's a lot of challenges, but actually, I would say there's some good opportunities. I think even with, like, there's a few businesses in the UK, and I'm aware of a few major retailers in the US in administration at the moment, as in heading towards closing down. The famous one in the UK that I'm really gutted about is Homebase. I love Homebase as a consumer. They've got everything there. It's always really well priced. The stores are never like the cleanest environment, but the products are great, generally last very well, and all the staff are friendly. They're going under at the moment. They're one of a lot of businesses that are. At the same time, if you're able to ride this wave at the moment, there are potentially some really good opportunities to pick up good staff. Every time a company disappears, there will be a wave of customers that are no longer buying from them. And bearing in mind, Homebase, I don't know the figure, but they must be doing millions, if not heading towards $1 billion in turnover every year. They're a huge retailer here in the UK. So actually, there's an opportunity to pick up some of those customers. And one of the things, just going from kind of, we're talking macro, global, political level, going right down to micro, if you're in the UK or you're in the US and there's similar businesses going under to yours right now, you can literally just target their keyword on Google Ads. You're not allowed to put a trademark term in the advert itself, but almost everybody does what's called competitor advertising. And there's a great opportunity to anything that people loved about that brand, put that in your advert and say, we also offer this loyalty program. We also sell this product. We have the same warranty guarantee. There's always opportunities that start to come out of this, but I always think it takes a bit of lateral thinking. So I would certainly keep an eye out as to what businesses are doing well, which ones are struggling. And actually, I've never really kept up massively on reports of, like, the FTSE 100 or the NASDAQ and all the other financial markets. Now's probably a good time to see who's kind of growing and who's sliding in those. And that might change decisions on how much you invest in marketing, when you invest in marketing, and what you do. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this at all, Laurence. I know you kind of look at how markets are moving, but yeah, it'd be good to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The data that the markets use to understand if retail is doing well or not, the same data you can access. A lot of the information they're consuming and like thinking about are, like, as you were saying, like maybe competitors, looking at if they're publicly listed, like how their balance sheets look, how their outlook is. Does it look good or bad? And then there's also the economic data as well. Like, all of that's readily accessible from kind of statistic offices, websites, as well as vendors like Bloomberg. You can look at retail sales data and look at how that's broken down by which part of the industry. So if it's automotive, like car sales, for example, is it online sales that is doing well? You can break it down. You can have a look at those trends. So there definitely are opportunities out there, and I think behind every headline number, there's an opportunity also, as you say, Nick, to dig down more micro and kind of experience and look at the experiences of people in your specialisms. One of the things I picked out when I was kind of prepping ahead of this was I was looking at UK consumer confidence, and we're saying it's not doing so well. And there are reasons for that, but like when you break that down and you start to look at consumer confidence by household income, I actually found a really interesting story where people earning over £50,000 a year are back in positive territory. They're feeling good about the economy. They're feeling good about consuming, but they're the only category that are. So, is there an opportunity to find these sort of stories behind the headline numbers? Maybe your higher end spenders have more capability to continue to spend while others may not. So it's well worth digging in. I hope that's helpful.
It is actually, and I've shared this a few times in the last few kind of sort of 3 or 4 months. Um, we work with a lot of retailers, and we've also asked a lot of other agencies that we know, can we have some anonymized data? And they're simple questions, but there's definitely some trends coming out. One is that I asked about 20 agencies and said, and some of them do marketing like I do, some of them build websites, some of them do PR, social, etc. And I said to them, if you can put all your customers in buckets based on the product they sell, are they kind of top end of market? Are they middle market? Or are they like trying to be the cheapest? Like every penny they can increase their price by without losing customers is a success. So it's like we're going to be as low as possible while still just kind of skimming through. So low profit, high volume, or high profit and kind of low to medium volume. And what was interesting is exactly as you say, the more luxury items, the high end items, the more expensive items, a lot of them were seeing an increase. So when they say like, okay, total revenue in retail is dropping, it's like it's dropping in the middle market. And that's been the interesting thing. So middle market's splitting. It's either going, I'm actually doing quite well here. And I'll give you an example where I think the middle market's doing well is if you own an asset like an ISA or an investment account or properties, you'll tend to be making a bit more money out of this. And particular video you sent me as well to watch, Laurence, which I found fascinating, was talking exactly about this. You tend to be making a bit more money if you have assets, which means you're going from middle market now to high end, and high end's doing well. But that means the middle market products have just lost a bit of their audience. The other side of middle market, and maybe that kind of that 50 to 80,000 a year income in the UK is that middle bit. They're moving down to the cheaper end, going, I need to save some money, I need to economize here. The middle market's just been slapped in the face in the UK, and it's not totally dissimilar. We've seen in US clients as well, which has been really interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is probably going to be, the experience of the last few years after the pandemic. Both US and UK governments spent a lot of money putting money in the hands of people who were out of work. So we had like the furlough scheme here in the UK that paid 80% of your salary. In the US, they also were given a lot of handouts, and those things were necessary. But the consequence of that, and the disrupted supply chains, and also the war in Ukraine, really served to push inflation really high, something we hadn't seen for decades. Um, and unfortunately, when you have such high inflation, that erodes away what we call real income. So if you have £100 today and inflation is really high, that £100 is not going to go as far in a year's time. Um, and I think what you're saying about that middle kind of income or middle market is that a lot of that disposable income was eroded away by inflation, and only at least in the UK in the last 6 months or so, as we've seen inflation come back down towards kind of like 2%, which is the central bank target, have real incomes grown. But consumers are still very kind of hesitant, I think, based on that experience, to spend big, definitely, especially when the uncertainty around the economy is higher.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and the thing with inflation, that if anyone's hearing some of these words like inflation and stuff and going, I hear it on the news, never really looked at it. The thing that amazes me about inflation is like, and someone said this to me a few months ago, and I'll tell you after we've recorded, Laurence, because you'll know who they are. But someone said to me a few months ago, it's like inflation's coming down, great, everything's going to get cheaper. I'm like, no, everything's still getting more expensive. Just it's not going up like that anymore. It's going like kind of, it's only gone up 1% instead of 3%. That's why, it's like it's always going to increase. I mean, not necessarily, it's not guaranteed to, but traditionally over history, it's always going up. That's why you hear stories that like Nan and Granddad bought their house for £1, and you're like, what? Where can I get a house for £1? I'll buy 10. Like, I'll buy 1,000. So like it's the same item, but money, exactly as you say, Laurence, money's worth less. I think from a business, retail, e-commerce point of view, guys, I would say all of you need to really look at that middle market and go, are we going to survive in this middle market? Should we actually try and economize our supply chains to make our products cheaper, and then use that as marketing leverage? Go, it's still the same £80 product, we're selling it at 60 now, and that becomes that's something consumers can buy into. Or actually, and I've shared this very simple sum 1,000 times on the show, and I'm just using this hypothetically, don't actually do this. In fact, one client, we did do this actually. You double all your prices, and if you lose less than 50% of your sales, your quid's in. In fact, even if you lost 55, 60%, because you're now shipping out less products, you're getting more or the same cash. as long as you lose less than half your sales. So if you sold 100 of them at £10 each, that's £1,000. If you make them £20 each and only sell 500 of them, you've still made 1,000, and you've only shipped half the amount of products as well. So if you offer free delivery, you've just saved half your delivery cost whilst making the same money. Now, where this really worked is we had a client that was like, no one's buying our product and they're making it a bit cheaper, bit cheaper, bit cheaper, bit cheaper. We made them more expensive and we changed the background color on their website. It's a little bit more complicated, but we made it purple. That was a really rich, expensive color. And suddenly, it took 2 or 3 weeks, but suddenly we were attracting a very different type of customer who were like, this is cheap, because there is no such thing. And I guess this is a really important part. And comes back to what you say, Laurence, about consumer confidence. There's no such thing as expensive and cheap. It's value. What does this person that you're targeting and is coming onto your website that you're targeting with marketing, what do they perceive as the value? And if they perceive the value to be £20 instead of 10, or £200 instead of 100, then great. Then sell to that market, which means you can add a bit more to them. But I think so many retailers base their pricing, and this is a bit of an issue, I think. Maybe we should get a pricing person on the show at some point, but they base their pricing on going, well, that costs us $10 and we need to run all our business stuff. So it's going to $25 is like that is break even point. So we'll charge 35 when actually they could be charging 100. And I think until you test it, and there are apps in Shopify you guys can use that will run multiple prices for the same product and feed back to you, these are where you should set your prices. You sell slightly more at a higher price. Imagine that. You get more sales at a higher price because the perceived value's changed. And it's all part of marketing. How do you position that product? And this is where, I guess, really hard for governments and economists and stuff, isn't it, Laurence, to go, we can't really, it's hard to predict where people innovate and pioneer things because there's no data. You're almost like you're kind of following the trends to then work out what we should do next. Whereas there's that kind of like disruptor that comes into the market and just changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely. You really took me back to my A-level economics there. Like what you just described is what an economist would call the price elasticity of demand. But I won't bore
Nice.
everyone
I
with
didn't even know that was great. There we go.
But in terms of innovation, I'm not a specialist in that area, but there are so many opportunities. And you just have to look back over decades about how we've always stepped forward in society. You can think of the early 2000s with the IT revolution, go all the way back to Henry Ford and the way that he, revolutionized how we make cars. There are opportunities, and I think buzzword of AI is going to be one of those. But and governments are kind of scrambling to try and encourage that. But I think there are some really good opportunities. You should know your market. If there's something you're interested in and passionate about and see an opportunity for, push for it, because there's always an opportunity to go further and do better, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. And I think the only businesses that really make it are the ones that are kind of brave enough, I would say, to take a big risk. But even the word risk I use really lightly because quite often it's quite calculated. It's going, right, every single customer is saying, like, I would pay more if. Well, you need to make the if happen. Like that it's money just sitting there. One of the biggest things we talk a lot about this as well, guys. And then I've got another question for you, Laurence, about
Sure.
this year because I think there's a lot coming up here. But just to add one more thing, guys, as well, is it costs so much money to pay Google, Facebook, TikTok, whatever channels you're using to acquire customers as marketing campaigns. It costs so much to get them. And as someone who works in advertising and marketing, it's great. But actually, if you can get a second, third, fourth order from your customers through like putting something in their delivery slip, giving them a free product when they order, so they try something more expensive, more premium, that they then want to come back and buy later, email campaigns, social campaigns, SMS, once you've got someone in as a customer, I think a lot of retailers I've certainly seen in the last couple of years are doing nowhere near enough to nurture existing customers into next order. They already know who you are. Loads of their barriers are already broken down. So look at how do we make that first order experience as incredible as possible so that they just come back. And one of the examples when you were talking a second, Laurence, just popped to my mind was Apple. If you told me I'd be spending £1,000 on a phone when I used to have like a Nokia 3310 that even back then cost what, £30, £40, £1,000. It felt like a lot when I was a teenager, but even thinking like, am I going to spend £1,000 on a phone? Well, that's like the norm now. Everyone's buying a phone for £1,000 because the perceived value and the quality of phones and stuff, it's all there. So I think there are good opportunities to do that. And I'm just always hesitant when businesses start going, we're going to cut prices. I'm like, no, don't do that yet. Let's try and do the value piece first, because it's going to make you way more profit, which is going to kind of bypass all the things we've spoken about, all the gloomy things, like taxes going up, tariffs, etc., etc. But Laurence, it's 2025. I can't quite believe it. It still feels like 2000 to me. It doesn't really, guys. I'm well up with the times. But looking at 2025, are there any key dates that in the UK, US, or any other economies globally? Are there any key dates coming up this year? Any key things that you think people need to really keep their eye on and be aware of? And again, could either create kind of problems or opportunities depending on how they go into that.
It's a really interesting one, because if you asked me this question at the start of 2024, I would have said yes, definitely. 2024 was the year of elections across
Yep.
the globe. There was something like 50% of the world's GDP that was mostly driven
Really?
by the US. Yeah, like they had elections in those countries.
Yep.
This year, I think it's the consequences of those elections. So we've talked about Donald Trump. We've talked about the Labour Party here in the UK, but also, so there aren't as many dates, lines in the sand, but I think you need to be aware of what policies they're putting forward. Keep your ear to the ground in the markets that you work in, to understand what changes are happening, because I think this will be the year where those changes are implemented. Last year was the year of dates and elections. This year we'll see those changes. I think also, just to say, if you want to think about looking forward, there are lots of resources out there in terms of kind of thinking about outlooks and what is coming ahead for the year, to kind of international organizations that you could look at, like the IMF or the OECD, and they put out forecasts for the year ahead, and they break that down by different countries and markets as well. So I think, generally speaking, this year, the global economy, we're going to see inflation come back down, settle closer to target. We're not talking about 10% anymore. We're talking like 2 to 3, maybe 4%, and hopefully stronger economic growth. There are always going to be challenges. There are always going to be uncertainties, but being prepared and looking for the opportunities you were discussing, Nick, is a fantastic way to embrace that as a business, I think.
Yeah. And again, for anyone that's like not clued up on stuff, they're like, Nick, I love this because I listen to like the coolest Shopify apps, or like how did Gymshark grow? When you say like 2% instead of 10%, is that a by month, quarter, year? Like
Sure,
what
yeah.
kind of time frame is that?
Yeah, over the year. So like when I talk about inflation, we talk about consumer prices. So measuring the prices of like a typical basket. If you were going to go around the supermarket and buy your food for the week, what would typically be in your basket? And looking at how those prices have changed over 1 year. So in January 2024, what were the prices of an orange back then? Maybe it was 50p, and today maybe it's 60p. So that's how we calculate inflation.
Yeah. There's a news outlet, LBC, Leading Britain's Conversation, it stands for. It's just a radio show. You can listen to them online. And they're fascinating in the way that they approached inflation when it was crazy high, because every week they were going to the supermarket buying the same 5 items. That was like a block of cheese, some milk, a pint of milk, a loaf of bread, and there were like 2 or 3 other things. But they basically had this basket every week to say like, that's just got 12p more expensive in the last month, and it was quite interesting, I think, just looking at those things. Again, coming back to pricing, everyone, have a think about. I get like one of our clients looks at it this way, which I think is quite smart. It wouldn't work for every business, but every time they look at inflation, they go, right, we think it's going to be 2 or 3% this year. So let's assume 5. We'll take a really conservative approach. It's going to go up by 5. How are we going to increase our prices by 5%? And how are we going to communicate that to customers, or are we going to say nothing? Because actually, what you don't want to do is get into a position where if you do nothing, your margins just get shrunk, and then you're forced to act, and you're forced to act way more. And actually, I think having a strategy for that of like, if it's going to be 5% across the year, we're going to increase our prices by 1% every 2 months. and we're just going to do that. We're just going to do that. We're just going to do that. But we're going to do it as a test. So like half our audience will see the normal price, half will see the new price. We see no difference. Great. We can nudge it up by that much. As soon as we see the first comment on our review platform, social media telling us, oh my gosh, their prices keep nudging up. Right. Maybe we do need to communicate something and just explain why they're going up. I think it's the worst thing for any buyer, whether you're service, product, to hear is like, our price is going up 10% and you're not getting anything else for that. Equally, it's hard as a service-based business when we put our prices up. It's hard to say to our clients like, well, we just need to do that to pay the bills. It just unnecessarily puts us under the microscope, and they might start looking at alternatives, which is something we can avoid if we communicate it better than that. And Laurence, finally, when I asked you to come on, you said to me, Nick, there's an awesome report. I'm going to look at this report. Is it a public available report? Can people go and download it? Can we put a link in? Is it only available to Bloomberg customers? Tell us more.
Sure. So the kind of things I was looking at, there are a couple actually. These were like the consumer and the business barometers, the confidence indexes I talked a lot about in the podcast just now. The first one is the GfK confidence. You can go and find that. I think if you just go search that into Google, you'll find that they'll produce a summary. You might not get access to the full data set, but you'll get a summary and you'll get a little bit of commentary around what those show. And that'll be these kind of indexes, right? They're like, these are companies where they're going out and surveying the market and they're asking businesses what they're thinking about. And then the other one, if you just give me a second, I can find what it was called.
That's all right. And just while you're finding that, just for everyone listening at home or wherever you are right now, we'll put links to both of these as well. I'll get, we'll find a good resource to pick them up from and put links in the show notes. So whatever platform you're on, you should be able to see that. If not, our YouTube channel is probably the fastest way just to get hold of these links. Especially if they're coming out, as you say, regularly, Laurence. It's a good place just to go on there every week, every month, whatever the frequency is.
Yeah, exactly. They're pretty frequent, often monthly or quarterly. The other one I was looking at was the CBI, which is the economic service they have, and they have 3 different ones. And I think when we first discussed about it, it was literally coming out the next day, talking about the end of the year. So it was really great timing. I mean, there is an absolute ton of data you can look at. Bloomberg has some amazing tools to do that. A lot of the summary of these things we will also post on Bloomberg News or the website, so you can definitely see things there. So yeah, I mean, there's so much. I will just leave it at that for now, though.
Yeah. No, all good. I really appreciate that because, it was one thing hearing this episode, but people are sitting there going, actually, I want to hear loads more. It's good to have some resources. And just to kind of round off my thoughts on what we've been talking about today, guys, I love the fact that this is, for once in marketing, we get to look a bit further forward than just the standard 12-month retail calendar of Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, etc., and loads of other stuff in between, like Easter. It's nice to be able to look at this and go, right, actually, a lot of these resources you've mentioned and looking at things like inflation, there is a level of prediction we can do on this and go, do you know what? If I know what inflation is, I know where I'm going to be in 5 years. I know it's going to, well, certainly know roughly as an idea, it's going to be more expensive and my cash is going to go less, nowhere near as far as it used to. So actually keeping my stock levels internally at a good level means I'm sitting on stock, which is an asset as long as it is valuable from a marketing perspective to sell it. So I think there's some good opportunities to actually look forward rather than what we normally do in marketing is to come up with a hypothetical idea, we test it, we try and monitor it, get some stats and see how well it's gone, and then try and get some learnings and do the next one. It's nice to actually predict forward and go, well, we're going to have to make this change in the next sort of 1 to 3 years. So is it going to be a gradual change? Is it going to be overnight? How are we going to plan it? And we've got a bit of time to actually think about it and get proactive. Because I know what you marketing managers are like and founders. It's mad scramble going, is it Black Friday now? Yes, it is. Oh, quick, phone the marketing agency. And I'm the guy that gets the call. So the more we can plan ahead, the better. But Laurence, I want to say a massive thank you. I appreciate all the time you put in ahead of today as well. Thank you for joining us and thank you for sharing such great insights.
My pleasure, Nick. I really enjoyed being on, so thank you as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And for everybody listening at home, we are back again next week. If you haven't already, please hit that magical subscribe button, leave us a review. And also, if you're watching this, if you're listening and not watching this, please go on our YouTube channel. At the time of writing, we are 5 subs below 1,000 subscribers. And when we hit 1,000, we can change what we do on the channel. It opens a few doors to us. So go and hit that subscribe button, everybody. I've never asked you in such a direct way. If you're on YouTube right now, 98% of you are not subscribed. So hit that button, even though you're regular watchers. Please hit the subscribe button. Thanks for joining us. Back again next Friday, and I hope you all stay well. Our partners at Seguno have released a brand new app for Shopify, and it's called Shopify Connect for Canva. You can essentially look at all of your product images from Shopify directly in Canva and export them straight back. This can save you a lot of time. If you want to find out a bit more about this or go and find the app yourself, you can go to seguno.com/Canva. Enjoy.